You've been lied to about ninjas your entire life. Not just a little, completely. Forget the black outfits, silent flips, and perfect assassinations. Real shinobi were out here using cats as clocks, insects as sound machines, and literal vegetables as weapons. This is 44 bizarre tactics ninjas actually used, and once you hear them, Hollywood starts looking like a cartoon. 1. Carrying a live feline into a high-stakes mission sounds like a terrible joke, but historical shinobi actually utilized a bizarre biological trick called nekomi jutsu to tell time. Since mechanical watches were definitely not an option. In feudal Japan, these operatives relied on the raw biology of cats as a living chronometer. A feline pupil changes shape incredibly predictably as the sun moves across the sky. The eyes are round at dawn, narrow into sharp vertical slits at high noon, and dilate perfectly round again by dusk. Some operatives literally kept small cats tucked inside their robes during daytime operations, just to keep a highly accurate purring biological clock on hand. 2. Breakfast items were surprisingly high on the list of ingenious engineering tricks for Japanese espionage agents. Before heading out to masterfully bypass a castle's security system, an operative would carefully drain the yolk from ordinary chicken eggs. They would then pack those fragile empty shells full of iron filings, crushed glass, ash, and incredibly hot pepper powder. This chemical tool was called metsubushi. If a guard caught them breaching a secure perimeter, there was no theatrical magical smoke bomb. The operative just violently smashed this spicy grenade, creating a blinding toxic dust cloud. It was pure psychological shock and awe that allowed them to simply jog away. 3. Mapping the interior layout of an impenetrable fortress is incredibly difficult from the ground, so deeply innovative espionage clans basically invented the historical drone. When a target compound was surrounded by towering stone walls, operatives constructed massive paper and bamboo kites painted with terrifying demon faces. Under the cover of a pitch black windy night, an incredibly lightweight agent would physically strap themselves to the wooden frame and get launched hundreds of feet into the air. Think of it as conducting modern satellite surveillance by tying yourself to a massive beach toy. They would sketch the inner sanctum from the sky and smoothly glide back down before the baffled guards could even process the psychological shock. 4. Mud and snow were the absolute worst enemies of an operative trying to maintain total secrecy after an infiltration. Leaving a perfect trail of human footprints leading straight back to your secret hideout is terrible spycraft. To solve this massive problem, shinobi engineered special heavy wooden attachments for their sandals carved exactly like the paws of local wildlife. They would strap on fake wild boar hooves or bear paws and just stroll right out of the targeted compound. The next morning, angry military trackers would confidently conclude that a rogue bear somehow bypassed their security system and vanished into the mountains. It was the absolute peak of historical gaslighting. 5. Sending a terrifying message to a deeply paranoid warlord did not require violent physical confrontation when psychological dominance worked much better. A highly trained agent would bypass a completely locked-down security system, slip into the heavily guarded master bedroom, and absolutely nothing physical would happen to the sleeping target. Instead, the operative would quietly shave off the warlord's top knot and leave the hair resting perfectly on his chest. Waking up to realize an intruder stood over you for 10 minutes just to give you a humiliating haircut was a devastating mental blow. It proved their elite security forces were completely useless without a single real conflict. 6. Sending encrypted text messages in feudal Japan did not involve phones because it literally required throwing perfectly good rice into the dirt. Operatives painted rice grains in 5 distinct colors to create a highly complex biological secret code called goshikimai. They would casually drop this rainbow sushi ingredient by the side of the road to leave detailed intelligence for other spies. It is the historical equivalent of leaving a highly classified military dossier as a pile of colorful candy scattered on the sidewalk. If a guard walked by, they just assumed a careless peasant dropped their lunch. It was the ultimate encrypted flash drive and entirely edible. 7. Hollywood treats the kunai as a perfectly balanced throwing dagger designed for incredible mid-air acrobatics. Historical operatives would find that completely hilarious because this iconic weapon was literally just a heavy gardening trowel. Carrying a highly suspicious military blade was a great way to get arrested, but every peasant in the country owned a shovel. Spies used this flat iron tool to aggressively dig under castle walls, smash through thick plaster, and pry open heavy wooden doors. Picture a modern elite tactical unit bypassing a high-security compound using nothing but an extremely durable garden spade. They turned basic landscaping equipment into the ultimate covert breaching device. 8. Walking completely silently on squeaky wooden floors is mathematically impossible, so historical operatives mastered acoustic camouflage instead of trying to defy physics. They utilized weaponized background noise to mask their concealment techniques. Agents frequently carried small jars filled with live crickets or cicadas hidden in their belts. If someone accidentally stepped on a loudly creaking floorboard during an infiltration, they would immediately squeeze the jar to agitate the insects. The sudden loud chirping completely tricked the human brain. Castle guards would hear the noise, assume it was just annoying local bugs, and go right back to sleep. You do not need absolute silence if you can psychologically hack your enemy. 9. The most flawless disguise for infiltrating the inner sanctum was literally walking around with a giant woven basket completely covering your entire head. Agents frequently dressed as kamuso, which was a real sect of wandering monks who wore massive wicker beehives over their faces to represent their loss of ego. They would stand in the middle of a bustling courtyard playing a bamboo flute while secretly observing everything through tiny slits. Doing top-secret corporate espionage today while wearing a giant cardboard box on your head sounds completely ridiculous. However, in feudal Japan, absolutely nobody wanted to interrupt a deeply religious flute-playing basket man. 10. Bypassing sliding doors locked from the inside required serious engineering ingenuity rather than brute force. Since feudal Japanese mansions used wooden panels barred with heavy internal latches, operatives invented a specialized tool resembling a remarkably thin and flexible metal saw. Instead of breaking the door and ruining their concealment techniques, they slid this microblade between the wooden frames from the outside. By manipulating the blade using pure tactile feedback, they could slowly lift the heavy internal drop latch millimeter by millimeter until it quietly popped open. They basically treated an impenetrable fortress like a complicated puzzle box that could be smoothly unlocked without alerting a single soul. 11. Surviving a freezing winter stakeout requires intense mental discipline, but it also requires a remarkably cozy historical pocket heater. You cannot masterfully overcome a castle's security system if your fingers are completely frozen shut. To maintain ultimate dexterity in the snow, spies carried a compact copper tube called a denohai, filled with slowly smoldering gunpowder and ash. Picture a highly trained intelligence agent lurking in the frozen shadows for hours, just casually warming their hands like they are waiting for a modern bus in December. This brilliant engineering trick ensured their joints remained perfectly limber for picking intricate locks at an absolute moment's notice. 12. Hiding perfectly still at the bottom of a murky swamp for hours sounds like a cinematic myth, but historical operatives practically invented the tactical snorkel. When escaping an overwhelmed security perimeter, an agent might be forced to completely submerge themselves in a castle moat. To avoid drowning, they utilized their hollow sword scabbard as a giant breathing tube. Dodging a massive medieval security force today by simply laying at the bottom of a muddy pond and breathing through a giant metal straw sounds completely insane. It was an incredibly uncomfortable experience, but it completely baffled enemy trackers who assumed the intruder had magically vanished into thin air. 13. Carrying an obvious weapon into a heavily guarded political meeting is a terrible idea, so ingenious operatives weaponized basic office supplies instead. A standard yatat was a totally normal cylindrical container used by merchants to carry ink and writing brushes. However, a spy would hollow out hidden compartments inside this innocent stationery kit to conceal lockpicks or blinding powders. It is exactly like an undercover agent today, overcoming a billionaire executive using nothing but a surprisingly dangerous stapler and a malicious fountain pen. Guards would thoroughly search the operative, see a boring calligraphy kit, and completely ignore the incredibly sophisticated espionage toolkit right in plain sight. 14. Long before the invention of electronic wiretaps, feudal intelligence agents successfully bugged entire mansions using specialized wooden cones. Gathering audio intelligence from behind thick wooden walls required a custom-carved acoustic amplifier called a seotome that worked exactly like a modern medical stethoscope. The agent would press the wide end against the paper doors and place their ear on the narrow tip to capture incredibly quiet whispers from the room over. Trying to secretly listen to your neighbors arguing today usually involves a glass cup, but these agents had custom-engineered tactical listening trumpets. This ancient surveillance tech allowed them to steal state secrets without ever entering the room. 15. Defeating a massive opposing force without actually having any soldiers of your own requires a masterclass in deeply deceptive military theater. When a small operative clan was completely surrounded, they would rapidly tie dozens of lit torches to the horns of local farm animals and scatter them across the distant hills. In the pitch-black darkness, the opposing generals would see hundreds of glowing fires moving in formation and immediately assume a massive reinforcement army had arrived. A modern military commander surrendering a secure base just because a clever guy strapped glow sticks to a herd of confused sheep is pure psychological manipulation at its finest. 16. Staying hidden in a dusty attic for 3 days means you cannot exactly order room service. Historical operatives solved this massive logistical nightmare by baking their own aggressively terrible survival food called katsurigan. These emergency ration pills were packed with buckwheat, yam, lotus root, and pine bark. They tasted absolutely horrific, but completely stopped your stomach from growling loudly while you were hiding above a paranoid warlord. Conducting a highly sensitive stakeout while eating a dense ball of tree bark and raw flour is rough. Yet it was pure biological engineering designed to prevent a noisy digestive system from ruining a flawless infiltration tactic. 17. Instead of fighting heavily armed patrols, a historical operative preferred to let the security force defeat itself. If a spy infiltrated a samurai barracks, they would not engage in a flashy physical confrontation. Instead, they would quietly sneak between the sleeping guards and tie their sword scabbards together using incredibly thin silk threads. When the alarm was finally raised, the entire garrison would jump up in the dark and instantly trip over each other. While the elite soldiers were thrashing around on the floor, completely unable to draw their tangled weapons, the operative casually strolled out the back exit. It was a masterpiece of zero-contact tactical sabotage. 18. Cinematic agents love to magically run across the surface of a lake, but the actual physics of feudal espionage were much messier. The infamous water spider gear was never meant for gliding over deep water like a majestic swan. Instead, these massive circular wooden shoes were strictly engineered for aggressively stomping through utterly disgusting knee-deep swamp mud without sinking. Operatives essentially wore giant wooden donuts on their feet to gracefully bypass heavily fortified moat defenses. If a guard looked out into the foggy marsh, they would not see a mystical warrior gliding on water. They would just see a spy awkwardly trudging through thick sludge wearing tactical snowshoes. 19. Looking incredibly unattractive was a highly trained skill set for operatives needing to observe a target in broad daylight. While Hollywood prefers physically flawless agents in sleek gear, historical spies deliberately disguise themselves as the most repulsive individuals in the province. They would use special makeup and dirty bandages to simulate horrible contagious diseases. If you want to sit near a castle gate all day and count the guard rotations, you simply dress like someone with a highly infectious rash. Absolutely zero samurai wanted to approach or interrogate a visibly sick wanderer. It is a brilliant psychological hack utilizing pure human disgust to build an invisible shield. 20. Crossing a heavily guarded river without a bridge required operatives to pack incredibly weird inflatable luggage. Since carrying a full wooden canoe through a dense forest is tactical suicide, they engineered completely collapsible flotation devices. Some agents literally carried two large waterproof clay pots strapped together with rope to act as a makeshift buoyancy aid, while others used airtight animal skins. Arriving at a raging river and casually blowing up a giant leather balloon to float across is a totally bizarre thing to witness. However, it successfully got them past massive water barriers without alerting the local ferryman to their highly sensitive location. 21. Becoming completely invisible in an empty courtyard does not require a magical cloaking device if you perfectly understand human visual perception. When suddenly trapped in an open space without cover, operatives utilized a bizarre posture called uzuragakure, which translates to hiding like a quail. They would pull their arms and legs entirely inside their dark clothing and curl into a perfectly round, motionless ball. To a sleepy guard scanning a moonlit garden from a distance, the spy completely lost their human silhouette and just looked like a weird landscaping rock. It sounds silly to defeat elite castle security by pretending to be a garden stone, but the optical illusion worked. 22. Hollywood loves to show cinematic assassins throwing perfectly forged metal spikes on the ground to stop pursuers, but real operatives just used angry vegetables. Carrying a heavy bag of jagged iron around all night is loud, expensive, and a great tactical mistake. Instead, historical spies utilized dried water chestnuts. When completely dried out, these aquatic plants naturally harden into rock-solid spikes pointing in every direction. If a barefoot guard chased them in the dark, stepping on one of these organic traps immediately halted the pursuit. They had access to brilliant blacksmiths, yet they actively chose to defend themselves with incredibly aggressive botany. 23. Scaling a massive stone fortress required specialized climbing gear that absolutely could not look like specialized climbing gear. If an agent was searched at a checkpoint carrying a massive coil of rope and a heavy iron hook, they would be immediately arrested. To solve this, they engineered a thin, tightly braided cord with a small metal hook cleverly disguised as a totally normal clothing sash. The operative just wore their tactical ladder around their waist, keeping their pants up while bypassing strict security. When they reached the target wall, they simply untied their belt and threw it over the ramparts. It was the ultimate dual-purpose fashion statement. 24. Passing highly classified written documents was a massive risk because paper rustles loudly and can be easily discovered by patrolling guards. Instead of carrying traditional scrolls, operatives engineered a completely silent physical communication system using nothing but differently colored threads. By tying specific complex knots into a string, they could pass tactical messages through pure touch in pitch-black darkness. A spy could bump into an informant on a crowded street and casually slip a small knotted string into their hand. If the authorities found it, they just saw a worthless piece of tangled sewing thread. It was a zero-technology text message that bypassed the feudal legal system. 25. Memorizing the exact architectural layout of a massive enemy fortress is incredibly difficult, so female operatives essentially invented the tactical folding fan. These agents frequently infiltrated high society banquets disguised as traveling musicians or servants. While beautifully fanning themselves in the corner of the room, they were actually studying highly detailed castle blueprints, hidden right inside the painted paper folds. If a paranoid guard walked up to inspect them, all they saw was a lovely painting of cherry blossoms. The moment the guard turned around, the agent kept reading the secret escape routes. It was an elegant way to carry top-secret structural data right in plain sight. 26. Cinematic agents always look and smell perfectly clean, but historical operatives had to heavily regulate their diets to avoid smelling like dinner. Bypassing a highly sensitive security perimeter in pitch-black darkness is impossible if the local guards can smell a spicy meal from a mile away. Operatives strictly avoided eating garlic, onions, or strong meats for days before a major infiltration tactic. They essentially lived on a hyper-bland diet of rice and tofu just to maintain a perfectly neutral body odor. Catching a sudden whiff of roasted garlic in an empty hallway would instantly trigger a massive alarm, so tactical hygiene was a matter of survival. 27. Leaving a massive adult footprint in the mud is a terrible way to maintain secrecy, so operatives wore deliberately undersized footwear. These specialized straw sandals were called ashinaka, and they only covered the front half of the foot. By walking entirely on the balls of their feet, they achieved incredible athletic grip on slippery stone walls, while simultaneously leaving a bizarrely short footprint behind. If a paranoid castle tracker found the tracks the next morning, they would assume a very athletic small child had wandered through the compound. This brilliantly confusing psychological trick was designed to completely misdirect a feudal criminal investigation. 28. Pop culture insists that feudal spies were perfectly silent shadows, but in reality they absolutely loved massive explosions. When overcoming compound walls, an operative often relied on a hand cannon hidden in their robes. These crude early firearms were incredibly loud, horribly inaccurate, and produced massive clouds of thick white smoke. Instead of quietly bypassing security, they would just detonate a deafening explosive charge right in the middle of a courtyard. While the entire garrison was running around completely panicked by the blast and blinded by the smoke, the operative would simply slip through the confusion and accomplish their tactical goal entirely unnoticed. 29. Throwing a small rock to distract a guard is a classic Hollywood trope, but historical operatives utilize surprisingly aggressive local wildlife instead. When dealing with heavily fortified gates, an agent would frequently capture a badger, a stray dog, or even a very angry raccoon. They would quietly release the completely panicked animal right into the samurai barracks before quickly diving into the bushes. A terrified wild boar crashing through a paper door creates an incredibly loud and totally organic security breach. While heavily armored guards were frantically chasing a confused woodland creature around the courtyard, the operative just walked right through the suddenly undefended front entrance. 30. Texting your local informant during a siege is impossible, so feudal intelligence agents engineered a brilliant ballistic delivery system. When an operative was completely trapped inside an enemy compound, they utilized specialized hollow wooden arrows called yabumi to transmit highly sensitive data. They would tightly roll up thin rice paper containing crucial enemy troop movements, stuff it inside the wooden shaft, and fire it over the castle walls in the dead of night. The waiting Allied forces would simply collect the completely normal-looking ammunition scattered in the grass. It was the historical equivalent of sending an encrypted email by forcefully launching a thumb drive with a compound bow. 31. Carrying a highly dangerous blowgun through a strict military checkpoint is guaranteed to get you arrested, so agents disguise their artillery as musical instruments. Operatives frequently carried a shakuhachi, which is a completely functional traditional bamboo flute used by wandering monks. However, the incredibly thick bamboo was secretly hollowed out to perfectly fire tiny wooden darts coated in highly irritating plant extracts. A spy could sit in a bustling market playing a beautiful song and then casually disable a corrupt official without anyone realizing what just happened. It was a masterpiece of hidden engineering that turned a peaceful religious object into a deeply sophisticated tactical asset. 32. Hiding from a massive security sweep sometimes required falling asleep right in the middle of the enemy camp. Operatives mastered a bizarre psychological technique called tanuki gakure, which literally means hiding like a raccoon dog. Instead of running into the dark woods, they would quickly climb a large tree, tightly wrap themselves in a perfectly camouflaged brown cloak, and wedge their body into the high branches. To completely eliminate any nervous shaking or heavy breathing, they would force themselves to enter a deep, meditative sleep. Heavily armed patrols would frantically search the entire forest floor, completely unaware that the wanted fugitive was taking a peaceful afternoon nap above them. 33. Long before the invention of modern fiber optics, historical operatives engineered a massive optical network across the mountains using highly advanced lantern signaling. When deeply embedded inside an enemy province, an agent could not just send a messenger bird. Instead, they utilized hollowed-out wooden boxes containing a bright flame covered by specialized colored paper. By flashing different colors from a high mountain peak in a specific rhythm, they could transmit complex military data for miles in pitch-black darkness. It was essentially a historical Morse code system that allowed them to instantly leak state secrets right over the heads of completely oblivious border patrols. 34. Exchanging top-secret information in a crowded marketplace is incredibly suspicious if you just stand there whispering. To flawlessly pass intelligence in broad daylight, operatives engineered a psychological distraction technique called decoy, which involves staging a massive fake argument. Two undercover agents would bump into each other and immediately start screaming about a completely fake financial debt. While the local guards and nosy bystanders were highly distracted by the aggressive public drama, the spies were secretly exchanging encrypted scrolls and detailed tactical updates right under their noses. It was essentially weaponized reality television used for covert data transmission. 35. Planning a flawless nighttime infiltration required absolute atmospheric perfection, so historical operatives essentially became extreme meteorologists. While Hollywood ignores the weather, real agents knew that a heavy thunderstorm was the greatest acoustic camouflage in the world. To predict these exact conditions without modern radar, they heavily studied local spiderwebs. If a spider suddenly started aggressively dismantling its web, an operative knew heavy rain was coming within hours. Halting a highly complex military operation just because a tiny local insect decided to pack up its house is amazing. They synchronized incredibly dangerous castle breaches using nothing but raw woodland biology. 36. Cinematic agents glide through shadows with perfectly natural athletic grace, but historical operatives walked like completely malfunctioning robots. To preserve intense physical energy during a week-long stakeout and prevent their gear from violently clanking together, they utilized a bizarre gait called Namba Aruki. Instead of swinging opposite arms and legs, they moved the right arm and right leg completely simultaneously. It looks completely ridiculous to a modern observer, but this highly engineered posture kept their center of gravity flawlessly stable on uneven mountain terrain. They fundamentally hacked the human walking animation just to masterfully overcome strict security perimeters. 37. Standing perfectly still in the middle of a sparse forest while a patrol walks by sounds like a terrible strategy. However, operatives mastered an optical illusion technique called intonjutsu, which exploited human blind spots. If a spy was caught near a single thin tree, they would simply align their body perfectly with the trunk and slowly rotate as the guard walked past. By constantly maintaining the exact same visual angle, they effectively disappeared behind a sapling, barely wider than their own head. It is exactly like a cartoon character hiding behind a street lamp, but historically executed with such flawless precision that the heavily armed patrol walked right by. 38. While male operatives often relied on dirt and grim disguises, female intelligence agents turned high fashion into high-security breeches. They frequently wore the kanzashi, which is a beautifully ornate metallic hairpin used to hold up elaborate traditional hairstyles. These incredibly long floral accessories looked like pure aristocratic wealth but were actually secretly forged from hardened steel to serve as extremely effective lockpicks. A female agent could casually pull a shiny ornament from her hair and smoothly bypass an impenetrable interior mansion door. They basically carried completely invisible tactical hardware right in front of the deeply paranoid elite class. 39. Sending highly classified documents in feudal Japan required aggressive agricultural chemistry rather than suspicious coded scrolls. If an operative was stopped by border guards carrying complex encrypted messages, they would immediately fail the mission. Instead, they utilized a genius technique called a buridashi, which involved crushing soaked soybeans and using the clear liquid as invisible ink. To the naked eye, it just looked like a completely blank sheet of sketching paper. When the local informant received it, they simply held the paper over a warm candle, and the organic proteins would burn brown, instantly revealing the masterfully hidden troop movements. 40. Escaping a massive security force usually requires elaborate evasion techniques, but sometimes the greatest historical operatives just weaponized pure human greed. If an agent was spotted and chased by a large group of underpaid castle guards, they would not engage in a flashy cinematic battle. Instead, they would frantically reach into their pockets and scatter a massive handful of real copper and silver coins across the dark dirt road. Getting away just by throwing loose change at pursuing forces is the ultimate financial distraction. The heavily armored samurai would immediately abandon their strict military duty and start fighting each other for the money while the operative jogged away. 41. Bypassing the fortress walls often meant going underneath the problem rather than through the heavily guarded front door. Feudal Japanese mansions were built elevated on wooden posts, creating a dark, cramped crawl space underneath the massive floorboards. Highly trained operatives would literally bury themselves in the dirt beneath a warlord's private meeting room and stay absolutely motionless for days. They basically turned themselves into a biological wiretap. The operative would patiently listen and memorize every single whispered political alliance going on right above their heads. After days of gathering intelligence, they would casually crawl out into the night without ever stepping foot inside the building. 42. Cinematic agents carry utility belts packed with expensive high-tech gadgets, but the absolute most versatile tool in a historical operative's arsenal was literally just a small cotton towel. This completely normal strip of fabric was called a tenuguai, and it was the ultimate feudal multi-tool. A spy could tie it around their face as a mask, soak it in water to filter out toxic smoke, twist it tightly to create a makeshift climbing rope, or use it to quietly carry loose equipment. The most elite intelligence gatherers in history masterfully overcame strict castle security systems using the exact same cloth a regular farmer used to wipe sweat. 43. Bypassing heavy security checkpoints sometimes required putting on an aggressively ridiculous theatrical performance. Agents frequently utilized the disguise of a hokaashi, which was a wandering street magician who performed cheap juggling tricks and swallowed swords. If a highly trained spy needed to get inside a paranoid lord's heavily guarded compound, they simply started doing basic sleight of hand magic at the front gate. The guards would get so incredibly bored on their long shifts that they would actively invite the operative inside just for the free entertainment. Offering to show gate guards a really cool card trick was a legitimate infiltration strategy. 44. Defeating an entire opposing military force did not always require massive armies when you could just deploy weaponized paranoia. Elite operatives mastered a psychological tactic where they would forge incredibly detailed letters implicating a loyal general in a massive fake treason plot. The spy would then deliberately drop these highly classified fake documents in a hallway where the paranoid warlord was absolutely guaranteed to find them. Leaving a photoshopped message on a desk just to get a rival fired is a brilliant modern equivalent. The targeted leader would immediately panic, banish his best military commanders, and completely dismantle his own security system from the inside. Now be honest, after hearing all this, what's the one ninja tactic you're convinced we still missed? Not maybe, I mean something so weird it sounds fake, but probably existed anyway. Drop it in the comments and let's see who actually knows their stuff and who's just making things up with confidence. And if this didn't completely rewire how you see ninjas, hit like, subscribe, and stick around, because it only gets weirder from here.